Good morning. I got to tell you, I'm a little paranoid this morning. My wife kept tapping me and saying, "Look at me," and she had me like do this and do this. And so I don't know if I have broccoli in my teeth or I have a spider on my face or what, but if you see me kind of doing that, that's because blame my wife. I want to do a little public service announcement for everybody first, and it is important. Over the last couple of weeks, I've had the opportunity to talk to people at all four of the hospitals in Rockford, and either in their pastoral care units or in their chaplain's office, just really to find out what their procedures are as far as if somebody from North Park were to be admitted, what do they do? Do they notify the church? Do they notify me? Do they notify anybody? And so every hospital has a little bit different approach. And so while Swedes and OSF have in their pastoral unit somebody they would get a report and they would call us and say, so-and-so was admitted from your church, so that they do that. Mercy Health, both on the other side of town in Rockford, on Rockton, as well as the one here on Riverside, they really don't do that. So they said that the best thing to do would be if somebody is admitted to make sure that person, if they want the church to know, to have somebody call the church, either a family member or themselves. And I just say that because, I just want us to make sure we're all aware the safest and easiest thing to do would be if, in fact, you or somebody in your family were to be admitted to one of the local hospitals, to just make sure that either the church office gets called or I get called so that we know. Because even at OSF and at Swedes, they get a report that comes out every day, so it could be several hours, even another day that passes before they would get that report. And so we want to know if somebody has been hospitalized, and really the best way to do that is to make sure that somebody here at North Park gets contacted. So I just want to share that with you because obviously we care about everybody here, and we want to try to make sure that if somebody is hospitalized, that we can get there to see them, and we can let people know that they're at a hospital. So this morning, we're going to talk about making prayer a priority, aligning to the will of God. Yesterday we had a prayer breakfast at our house, and we had 12 guys came that weathered the storm, so to speak, and we had just had a really uplifting time of prayer. And so it's kind of fitting that this follows that, and we want to talk about making prayer a priority. When we think about life in general, there's some things that I would say we would consider to be necessities, and probably you would agree as well. Things like oxygen and food and water and clothing and shelter, those probably we would consider necessities of life. But what about priorities? What would be things that might be a priority? Maybe it's our family, maybe it's our job, maybe it's money, maybe it's our friends, maybe it's love, that we consider a priority, which is a little different than a necessity. But I wonder where prayer is in that. Is prayer looked at as a necessity in your life? Is it looked at as a priority in your life, or just really a convenience? And so I want us to talk a little bit about that today, because I think it's important that we take a look at it. You see, as human beings, we often have a strange sense of what a priority is. And sometimes those priorities maybe change based on what's most important to us at a particular moment in time. For example, there was a group of friends who went deer hunting, and they paired off by twos in the morning, and they went out doing their deer hunting throughout the day. And then at nighttime, when the hunters were supposed to get back together, one hunter came back, and he was struggling as he was walking, as he was trying to carry an 8-point buck that he had killed while hunting. Well, the other hunters that were there said, "Well, where's Harry?" And so he answered by saying, "Well, Harry fell and broke his leg. He's a couple miles back up the trail." So they asked him, said, "So you brought the deer and you left Harry with a broken leg a couple miles up the trail?" And the man was very frank. He said, "Well, I figured no one was going to steal Harry." So at that point in time, that deer was much more a priority than Harry. And so I think sometimes as humans, we have a tendency to kind of figure what is our priorities. And they may change from day to day. But I would say today that as we get early still into 2020, and as we look at ways for us to get better this year, individually get better, and as a church get better, to always look to ways to improve, one of those ways we can improve is by making prayer a priority. And there are a lot of things that we should be praying about, not just once a month or once whenever the Spirit moves us, so to speak, but should be praying regularly. And I just want to list a few, and you'll have a totally different list, or maybe you'll have a longer list. And I would even encourage you sometime to sit down and write down some of the things that you really think would be important to pray about. Because I think if we identify those, it will help us make prayer more of a priority. I'd say first, look around the auditorium. Now, there are a lot of empty seats. And it's not really because of the weather, because there have been empty seats here for many months. And that's just being brutally honest, because we're missing some of our members. And so that's something worth praying about. And so I would encourage us to think about that as we try to make prayer a priority. We're emphasizing this year really a commitment to being more welcoming and more kind and more encouraging. Again, very noble and worthy things as we make prayer a priority. And I would say too, in order for us to grow in our love for God, we need to make sure that we stay connected to God. And the best way to do that is through our prayer life. We desire biblical leadership here, and in order for that to take place and to be successful, God has got to take a great part in that. And so, another reason to make prayer a priority. We have members here at North Park who are lacking steady employment, and so they're facing challenges of just trying to pay bills and take care of their family. Something that we should be praying about. We also have people who are struggling with their health, whether it's their spiritual health or their emotional health or physical health. And again, a reason, if we truly take that Matthew 22 of loving God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and loving our neighbor as ourselves, and if we look at those people here as our neighbors, and we care about them, then they're worth our prayers. I would also say that our families are surrounded all the time by some form of evil, some moral decay. And we've got to have God put a hedge around our families, a hedge around our children, because they're being tempted to make bad choices, and we are being surrounded by things that are trying to draw our attention away from God. We need to be prayerful about that. In a little while, Bobby Letzinger is going to talk about our budget for 2020, and while that really gets into more kind of the financial side, but there's going to be opportunities, if you look closely within that budget, opportunities for us to be involved. Things like the pantry and the essentials house and teaching Bible classes and getting involved in our missions and our evangelism and our benevolence. There are things there, if we look closely, even within that budget, where we could get involved. And I would encourage us to pray about that and make prayer a priority along those lines. Next Sunday, Joe Nicosia and Chris Yalsey are going to talk to us as a congregation about something that we're calling the Great Day in May. And I want to encourage you to be here next Sunday to hear that and find out what that is. And because it's a great opportunity built within that for us to be committed and to be prayerful about the Great Day in May. And then in a couple more Sundays from today, Jeff Hagerman is going to share with us some thoughts about prayer and fasting as it relates really to our desire for elders, our desire for leadership, and again, worthy of committing our time and our energy to prayer. And the list could go on, and again, you could have a different list or a much longer list, but I think it's important that we start to think about aligning to the will of God, and to do that, we've got to make prayer a priority. I don't want you to answer this, and if you did, you might get in trouble, but how long can you go without talking to your wife or your husband or your child? Can you go an hour? Can you go a day? Can you go a week? How long do we go without talking to God? Have we made prayer a priority? In Acts chapter 12, Peter's in prison. And in verse 5 of Acts chapter 12, it reads that the church was earnestly praying to God for him. When was the last time any of us prayed earnestly about someone or something? You see, I am just as guilty as any in not spending enough time and enough attention in prayer. And so I want to do better and try to make prayer more of a priority in my life. The Apostle Paul regularly, when he wrote letters to churches, he would ask them to keep praying for him. And then in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18, Paul wrote this, and I think it's really important. He said, "Be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Jesus Christ." Paul thought that it was important to the church in Thessalonica for those members to pray and make prayer a regular part of their life. I think we need to once again become a praying people. We kind of have gotten away from that because, well, frankly, we say that life gets us too busy. There's too many demands on our time. Our schedule is too tight. We don't have time to get done what we need to get done every day. But I think it's important that we need to make prayer a priority when it comes to our families and our children, and when it comes to the lost, and when it comes to the church and our friends and those who are hurting. And that can't just be a once in a while thing. It's got to be a regular thing. While prayer can be very powerful, it's also like a treadmill. You see, it's designed to do good things. But in order for those to do good things, you have to use it in the way it was intended. And the more that we use it, the better the benefit. And so, if the treadmill sits and never gets used, there's no benefit gained. If it got used years ago when we had one, like a place to hang the clothes when they come out of the dryer, it really didn't solve much of its benefit. Prayer is no different. The more we engage in that, the better we're going to be, and the more benefit we'll be able to get from prayer. I think in the verses that Wayne just read, Paul is stressing again to Timothy how important prayer is. He said that a prayer-filled life can open the hearts of men and women everywhere, and in doing so, it can make them find the truth and want to seek and find salvation. Parents, let me ask you this question. If the future of your children was totally dependent on whether you made prayer a priority, would you make prayer a priority? I encourage you to pray for your children and pray with your children. Church, brothers and sisters, if the future of this congregation was dependent on whether we made prayer a priority, would we make prayer a priority? If the lost, the relative, the friend, the co-worker, the person who lives in Chicago, the soul in Haiti, the soul in Mexico, wherever they may be, if they're important, are they important enough to make prayer a priority? Are they important enough to ask God to open their hearts, or to put people in their lives who can reach them, or simply to give us an opportunity to be encouraged, an encouragement to someone? We should be able to do that through our prayer life. There's an illustration about the importance of prayer, and it's written by a lady by the name of Dorothy Haskin. And it was in her book called A Practical Guide to Prayer. And I want to share it with you because I think it really underscores what we need to do to make prayer a priority. And I want you to remember these two words as I share this with you. I want you to remember planned neglect. If you leave today and you don't remember anything else about what I say, please remember planned neglect, because I think it's critical to helping us make prayer a priority. And this is her illustration. She talks about how a noted concert violinist got to be so good at her craft, got to become a master, if you will, of playing the violin in front of the largest crowds, in front of the most popular venues. And she asked the woman how she did that, and the lady said simply these two words: planned neglect. And then she went on to explain it this way. She said, there were many things that used to demand my time. When I would finish breakfast, I would go to my room and I would make my bed, and I would dust, and I would straighten, and I would do all these chores. And then once all those were done, then I would focus on practicing my violin. But she said after time, that system prevented me from really getting good at the violin, because it wasn't her primary focus. So she said, I reversed things. She said, I deliberately planned to neglect all those things that were taking up my time until I did my practice on the violin. So by using planned neglect, I put all those distractions, all those other things aside, and I focused on my craft. And that's how I became as good as I am in the violin. So I'm wondering this morning if planned neglect isn't a good thing to think about when it comes to making prayer a priority. Instead of jumping out of bed and going to eat breakfast or getting a shower or getting ready for work or school or whatever our day is going to bring, maybe before our feet even hit the ground, we should employ planned neglect and spend some time in prayer. Before we go to a meeting, or we have lunch, or we work on a project, before we do that, maybe it would be good to practice planned neglect and pray first. Before we get angry with our spouse, or we discipline our children, or we get critical of a coworker, maybe we need to employ planned neglect. We need to put those things aside and focus on connecting with God first, and using that time to make prayer a priority. And when I talk about planned neglect, I don't mean to neglect prayer, but to practice planned neglect because of and for prayer, to help make it more of a priority. You know, our prayers are really simply conversations with God, and sometimes we can learn a lot from our children because they're just so honest and so sincere when they pray. And I think we can learn from them. I think when we speak to our Heavenly Father, we need to talk about what's important to us. So it goes back to making that list of priorities, maybe, things that we want to focus on. But prayer has to be one of those priorities in our life. It's powerful. It's far-reaching. We can pray to God about people we will never meet. We can pray to God about events and activities that we will never do. We will pray to God about places we will never be. But yet, if it's a priority, and if we make prayer a priority, we can use the power of prayer to reach out to others. E. Stanley Jones said this about prayer, and I think it's really important, especially to that underscore of aligning to the will of God. He said this. He said, prayer is surrender. Surrender to the will of God in cooperation with that will. He said, if I throw out a boat hook from the boat and catch hold of the shore and pull, do I pull the shore to me, or do I pull myself to the shore? Prayer is not pulling God to my will, but the aligning of my will to the will of God. We need to make prayer a priority. Again, the first 4 verses of what Wayne read in 1 Timothy 2 say this. He says, I urge you then, first of all, that requests, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. As we continue through 2020, as we try to get better, as we try to focus more on loving God and loving others, as we try to be more welcoming and more involved, as we try to be kinder and more encouraging, as we try to be more trusting when it comes to God and our relationship there, will our prayer life pull you and me and others closer to the will of God? If we make prayer a priority, I believe that it will. And I just want to encourage all of us to try to make prayer more of a priority in our lives in 2020. Let's stand together and sing.